The beginning of the end didn't look dramatic. There was no warning, no sudden shift, no argument that split us open. It began with something that looked harmless on the surface, a work trip. A simple assignment out of town, nothing unusual, nothing threatening. That's how betrayal usually arrives. Not as a threat, as something reasonable. She had always been ambitious, driven, focused on her career in ways that made me admire her even when it took her away from home for long nights or early mornings. So when her company chose her to lead a new project in another city, I felt proud. She deserved the recognition. She deserved the trust. At least that's what I told myself then. I helped her pack, watched her fold her clothes neatly, watched her tuck away her laptop, watched her smile with excitement at the thought of new responsibilities. I didn't see the distance forming in her eyes even before she walked out the door. Maybe I didn't want to. The morning she left, she hugged me like she always did. Warm, steady, familiar. Her scent lingered on my shirt long after the door closed behind her. And for a moment, everything felt normal. Hopeful, even. But normal has a way of disappearing quietly. The first few days were good. We texted often. She called me at night. Her messages were warm, full of details, full of energy. She spoke about the new team, the challenges, the hotel, the fast pace. She sounded alive. More alive than I'd heard her in months. At the time, I thought it was the excitement of new work. I didn't consider that it could be someone new giving her that spark. The shift happened slowly, so slowly that if I were less attentive, I might have missed it entirely. The morning texts became shorter. The evening calls became irregular. The warmth began fading, replaced by a tone that felt mechanical and distant. She wasn't cold. She was distracted, focused on something I couldn't see. I blamed stress. I blamed workload. I blamed the new environment. I blamed everything except the truth. But distance isn't measured in miles. It's measured in effort. And her effort toward me was shrinking. One evening, I waited for her usual call. Hours passed. The phone stayed silent on the table. When she finally messaged, the explanation was short and tired. Something about a long day. Something about falling asleep early. Something about tomorrow. I ignored the discomfort that crept into my chest. People get tired. People get overwhelmed. People forget. But forgetting becomes a habit faster than anyone expects. Days turned into weeks, and each one carried a quiet confirmation that something had changed. Her messages became colder, not rude, just empty, polite, distant, like writing to someone out of obligation rather than desire. She sent fewer emojis, then none at all. She stopped sending photos. She stopped asking about my day. Sometimes she didn't respond for hours, though I knew she'd seen the messages. I could feel her slipping away, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The first real warning sign wasn't the silence. It was the tone, the heavy, muted energy in the rare moments she did call. Her voice sounded far away, not because of bad signal, but because she had already placed emotional miles between us. I began to fear the evenings instead of looking forward to them. I would stare at my phone, trying to convince myself everything was fine, trying to hold on to a version of her that no longer existed. There's a certain humiliation that comes from waiting for someone who no longer waits for you. Every night, I found myself scrolling through old photos of us, trying to feel something other than confusion and dread. Her smile used to feel like home. Now it felt like a memory I was struggling to keep alive. Then came the morning she didn't respond at all. No message, no missed call, no acknowledgement of mine. I paced around the house, pretending not to panic, pretending not to feel the cold weight settling in my stomach. Hours passed before she sent a short apology. Something emotionless, something distant, something that felt more like a duty than communication. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things. People change under pressure. Stress makes them different. Work steals attention. Sleep steals energy. But attention isn't stolen. It's redirected. And hers was no longer directed at me. One night I called her. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. No answer. I looked at the ceiling and tried to quiet the storm inside me. Maybe she was in a meeting. Maybe she fell asleep. Maybe her phone was charging. Maybe, maybe, maybe. A word that becomes poison when you say it too often. She texted very late that night. Another short message. No warmth. No curiosity. Just a line or two that felt like a placeholder for something she didn't want to say. And that was the moment the reality hit me. She wasn't overwhelmed. She was gone. Not physically, emotionally. An emotional absence is far more devastating. I stayed up for hours that night, staring at the blank ceiling, feeling the weight of a truth I didn't want to confront. The person I loved was slipping through my fingers, and I couldn't even understand why. The next week, everything grew worse. She took longer to reply. Sometimes she didn't reply at all. Her voice, when I heard it, sounded tired. Not the tired that comes from work, but the tired that comes from pretending. She no longer asked about my day. She no longer shared hers. She no longer spoke like someone who had a home waiting for her. I felt like a man holding on to the edge of a cliff while the person on the other side let go willingly. Then came the night she sent the message that changed everything. A short, cold line. A sentence that carried the weight of a broken promise. She told me the project was taking longer. She didn't know when she would return. She needed more time. I stared at the screen for a long time, realizing the meaning beneath the words. She wasn't coming home soon, and maybe she didn't plan to come home at all. My hands shook. Not from anger, from grief. The kind of grief that has no outlet because nothing has been said out loud yet. Lying to yourself becomes impossible when the person you love stops trying to hide the truth. The next days confirmed it. The silence grew. The distance deepened. The connection faded to almost nothing. I felt like I was already grieving the end of a marriage that hadn't been officially declared dead. And deep inside, I knew something else. Her heart had found someone else long before her words confirmed it. The days after her message felt like walking through a fog that only thickened with every hour. I still woke up at the usual time, still made coffee the way I always did, still checked my phone out of habit, but everything inside those routines had changed. Nothing felt solid anymore. Nothing felt like it belonged to the same life I had before she left. Her absence wasn't just physical. It was emotional. It seeped into the walls of the house, into my chest, into the quiet moments I used to enjoy. The home we shared still smelled the same, still held her things, still mirrored the life we built, but now it felt like a museum. A space dedicated to what used to be. Every morning, I scrolled through old messages just to remind myself of who she had been before she left. Warm, open, loving, present. And every night, I stared at the newest messages. The ones cold as winter air, brief to the point of cruelty, stripped of the smallest trace of affection. It was like watching a fire die out one ember at a time. Her calls became rare, her texts shorter, her excuses longer. She no longer told me about her day. She no longer sent photos of her meals or her view from the hotel window. She no longer shared anything that connected us. It was like her life had moved to a different city with her, and I had been left behind in a version of the past she had no intention of returning to. At first, I thought it was stress, exhaustion, pressure from her new role. But stress doesn't erase affection. Pressure doesn't kill connection. Work doesn't change the tone in someone's messages. People do. I tried to stay patient, to give her space, to trust that things would settle once her project stabilized. But deep down, I felt it. A quiet dread building inside my chest, like a warning whisper that grew louder with every unanswered message. There was one evening that shifted everything. I called her after work, hoping to hear something, anything, that sounded like the woman I married. The call didn't go through at first. Then it went straight to voicemail. A minute later, her phone suddenly showed as busy. I felt something in me turn cold. Not because I had proof of anything, but because intuition is louder than any evidence when you've been with someone long enough. I sat on the couch with the phone in my hand, staring at the dark screen, feeling like a man watching a train leave a station he was supposed to be on. There was no explosion of emotion, no panic, no outrage. Just a slow, sinking heaviness, the kind that wraps around your ribs and pulls you inward. Later that night, she sent a message. Short, careful, detached. She wrote about being tired, about being overwhelmed, about not having energy to talk. But exhaustion doesn't erase affection. And overwhelm doesn't erase love. It erases lies. In the days that followed, her communication became unpredictable. Sometimes she would respond after hours of silence. Sometimes she would send a short reply that felt like an automatic reaction rather than a message for me. Sometimes she didn't reply at all, leaving my last words hanging in a void. The truth wasn't spoken, but it was present in every gap between us. I tried to keep myself busy. Long walks, long drives, anything to fill the silence. But no matter where I went, the emptiness followed. There's a certain humiliation in waiting for a person who no longer waits for you. It strips you down in a way that's hard to describe, not because of pride, but because of love. I still loved her, even when she was slipping away, even when it was obvious. One evening, I opened her social media out of pure instinct, a habit I never had before because I never needed to. She hadn't posted anything new. Everything looked normal, but normal can be the cruelest disguise. The next day, she didn't answer my calls at all. Not once. Not even late at night. That was the first day I felt fear. Not fear of cheating, but fear of losing her entirely. The kind of fear that sticks to your skin. The kind that makes you stare at the ceiling in the dark, wondering what you did wrong, wondering what you didn't do, wondering what changed inside her while you were still believing in the two of you. The worst part wasn't the silence. It was the feeling that she wasn't struggling with it the way I was. Her distance felt intentional, calculated, like someone slowly pulling a thread from a sweater until the whole thing unravels. Then, one night, she sent a voice message. Not long, a few seconds. Her tone was calm, almost too calm. She sounded collected, detached, careful. She mentioned being busy. She mentioned needing rest. She mentioned the project stretching longer than expected. But underneath the words, I heard something else. A kind of softness people use when they're trying not to spark a reaction. The tone someone uses when they are managing your emotions because they've already moved on internally. I replayed that voice message over and over, analyzing every breath, every pause, every shift in her tone. Not because I was looking for a lie, because I was looking for the woman I used to know. She wasn't there. I didn't tell her what I was feeling. I didn't accuse her of anything. I didn't want to corner her or pressure her into explanations she wasn't ready to give. Instead, I carried the weight alone, like a man walking with an invisible stone in his chest. Days continued to go by, and each one pulled her further away. Her texts became so rare they felt like charity. Her replies came without warmth, without curiosity, without anything that resembled the woman who once couldn't fall asleep without hearing my voice. The silence between us stopped being silence. It became an answer, painful one, clear one, final one. Then came the night I heard nothing at all. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. My phone stayed dark. And for the first time, I didn't feel panic. I didn't feel jealousy. I didn't feel desperate. I felt acceptance. A calm, cold acceptance that only arrives once something inside you breaks cleanly. The truth was no longer hiding in the quiet. It was standing in front of me. She was gone. Emotionally, mentally, maybe even physically. All that remained was the moment she would finally say it out loud. I didn't want that moment. I didn't want to hear the words, but I knew they were coming. Because distance doesn't grow this wide without someone else standing on the other side of it. There is a moment in every dying relationship when the ending becomes more familiar than the beginning. A moment when the silence stops feeling temporary and starts feeling permanent. A moment when you stop expecting warmth and start expecting distance. By the time the final shift came, I had already lived through enough small endings to survive the big one. Her absence had become routine. Her delays predictable. Her short messages more honest than anything she could have said out loud. Every hour without her reply felt less like an accident and more like a deliberate step away from me. The truth had already settled in my bones long before she spoke it. I spent those days in a strange emotional limbo. Not broken, not angry, not desperate. Just suspended between who I had been with her and who I was becoming without her. Walking through the house felt like moving through a version of my life that belonged to someone else. Her clothes still hung in the closet. Her perfume still lingered on the dresser. Her mug sat by the sink, waiting to be used again. But none of those things held meaning anymore. They were just objects tied to a memory that no longer had a heartbeat. I found myself avoiding our bedroom. I slept on the couch most nights, not because the bed felt painful, but because it felt dishonest. Like pretending we were still living in the same story when she was already halfway into another one. Even my own reflection in the mirror had changed. I looked tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. Not defeated, just drained, like someone carrying the emotional weight of two people. One afternoon, while cleaning a drawer, I came across old photos of us. Vacations, birthdays, nights out, quiet mornings, everything that once defined our life together. I stared at the images, trying to recognize the woman smiling beside me, trying to remember when her eyes stopped lighting up that way, trying to pinpoint the moment her affection slipped into indifference. But there was no single moment. It was a slow fade, the kind that feels impossible until it's unavoidable. I put the photos back without feeling the need to hold on to them. Nostalgia only hurts when you still want the past. I had stopped wanting it. It was a strange kind of acceptance. I still loved her, in a way, not the way you love someone who is yours, but the way you love someone who once mattered so deeply that the echo of that love lingers even after the person is gone. But echoes aren't foundations. The day her message finally came started like any other. Quiet morning. Coffee that tasted dull. A phone that stayed silent longer than it reasonably should. I didn't sit beside it anymore. I didn't pace. I didn't check it every 5 minutes. I had grown used to the feeling of being forgotten. When the notification finally appeared, I felt something strange. Not dread, not relief, just an open, empty space where emotion used to be. Her message was longer than anything she had sent in weeks. Not warm, not affectionate, not hopeful, just long. Long messages never bring good news. I opened it slowly, not because I feared the words, but because I already knew their weight. Reading it felt like watching a building collapse in slow motion. You see each floor give way, you feel the heaviness in your chest, but you don't move because the destruction had been happening long before the final impact. She wrote about stress, about distance, about feeling lost, about the demands of her job. But underneath all those carefully chosen lines, the real meaning sat quietly between them. Her heart wasn't here anymore. It had found something new, someone new. She didn't use the word, but I felt it with absolute clarity. The softness hidden in her sentences, the guilt beneath her explanations, the hesitations in her phrasing. People don't speak that way unless they're hiding a truth they're too afraid to name. When I reached the final part of her message, I paused. Not because I was shocked, I wasn't, but because a part of me finally exhaled. She wrote that she was staying longer. She wrote that she wasn't sure when she'd be ready to return. She wrote that she needed space. And then, the sentence that turned distance into a decision. She didn't think coming home made sense anymore. That was the moment her emotional absence turned into a confession. Not spoken, not direct, but complete. I put the phone down slowly and leaned back on the couch, letting the words settle around me. There was no outburst inside me, no heartbreak, no disbelief, just a quiet, heavy calm. The kind of calm that comes when the last piece of a puzzle finally slides into place. I wasn't blindsided. I wasn't betrayed in a sudden twist. I wasn't left in shock. I had been grieving the end long before she admitted it. I walked to the window, looking out at the street I'd seen 1,000 times. The sunlight hit the pavement in muted streaks. A few people walked by, carrying their own lives, their own problems, their own endings and beginnings. The world didn't stop because mine shifted. It rarely does. As I stood there, something unexpected settled into me, a sense of freedom. Not happiness, not relief, just freedom. The freedom that comes when a burden finally names itself. When the truth becomes undeniable. When the lie collapses under its own weight. She was gone. Not because she didn't love me anymore, but because she had chosen a new version of herself. A version that didn't include me. Her absence wasn't an accident. It was a choice, and choices once made don't rewind. That night, I sat alone in the dim light of the living room. The house felt unusually quiet, almost respectful, as if giving me space to process the finality of what had just happened. I thought about calling her, asking why, begging for clarity, demanding explanations. But what would any of that change? The truth was already complete. She had found someone in that other city, someone who filled the emotional space I had been trying to hold onto alone, someone who gave her the spark that used to come from me, someone who became her new reality while I was stuck waiting for the old one to return. People break promises quietly, slowly, softly, until one day, the promise simply doesn't exist anymore. I realized then that the love I had been holding on to wasn't love anymore. It was memory, and memory is the most dangerous substitute for reality. She was never coming back. Not to me, not to this home, not to the life we built. And for the first time, I no longer needed her to. I didn't know what the future would look like. I didn't know how I'd rebuild, how I'd move forward, how I'd fill the quiet spaces in the house. But I knew this. The chapter was ending, and the final page was already written. All that remained was to turn it. The morning after her final message, the world felt strangely still. Not empty, just quieter, as if everything inside and around me had finally stopped pretending. The truth was no longer a shadow hovering over my days. It was a fact, solid and immovable, carved into the space where hope had lived for too long. She wasn't coming back. Not to the house, not to the life, not to me. And for the first time since she left for that work trip, I didn't wake up with the urge to check my phone before anything else. I didn't wait. I didn't hope. I didn't imagine her name lighting up the screen. Instead, I lay there for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, feeling a calm I hadn't felt in months. A calm that didn't come from acceptance alone, but from understanding what acceptance meant. It meant the end, but it also meant the beginning. I got out of bed slowly, walked into the kitchen, and made coffee with the same motions I had practiced for years. This time, it tasted different. Not better, not worse, just mine. The silence in the house didn't feel hostile anymore. It didn't feel like abandonment or loss. It felt like space, clean, wide, open space where something new could grow. For the first time in a long time, I didn't imagine her walking through the door. I didn't imagine her voice filling the house. I didn't imagine the two of us repairing something that had died long before she admitted it. The house wasn't a reminder of her absence anymore. It was proof that I was still here. By mid-afternoon, I walked through the house with a slow, deliberate pace, collecting the things that belonged to her. Not to punish, not to cleanse, but to make room. For myself, for closure, for whatever life waited beyond the four walls we once shared. Her clothes went into bags, her books into boxes, her photos off the shelves, stacked neatly in a pile. Each item carried its own echo, but none of them hurt. They were just remnants of another version of life, a version that no longer needed to take up space. As I moved through the rooms, I found old notes, souvenirs from trips, small shared moments we once treated like treasure. Some made me pause, some made me breathe a little heavier, but none of them made me wish to go back. Love doesn't die in a single moment. It dissolves across hundreds of small ones. By the time I finished packing the last box, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not healed, healing isn't instant, but unburdened. Her things didn't belong here anymore. Neither did the weight of waiting for someone who chose not to return. In the evening, when the sun started sinking behind the houses, the light cut across the living room floor in long, soft lines. A reminder that endings don't happen in darkness, they happen in clarity. I took out my phone, not because I wanted to argue or plead or question, but because I wanted closure on my terms. I typed slowly, carefully, intentionally, not with anger, not with resentment, but with honesty. I told her the truth, that I understood, that I felt the distance long before she named it, that I wasn't angry, that I hoped she found whatever she had been searching for, and that I would be moving on with my life. I didn't ask anything of her. I didn't demand explanations. I didn't leave room for hope. I pressed send. And with that, something inside me finally released. She replied only once much later. A short message. Soft. Guilty. Final. And that was the moment our marriage ended. Not with betrayal, not with heartbreak, but with two people quietly stepping out of a story that no longer fit. I didn't reread her message. I didn't save it. I didn't dissect it. I deleted it as easily as she had slipped away. Some words aren't meant to be held on to. Filing for divorce wasn't dramatic. It was practical. Simple. The same way you close a door after stepping outside, not with emotion, but with acceptance that you're not going back inside. The process moved faster than I expected. Her signature came without questions, without hesitation, without apology. There was a sadness in that, but also a freedom. In the end, there was nothing left to divide except space. She kept her new life in her new city. I kept the house. And both of us kept the ghosts we needed to make peace with. When the final paperwork arrived, I held it in my hands for a moment, feeling the weight of it settle into my chest. Not heavy, not painful, just real. I placed the papers in a drawer, closed it quietly, and exhaled. It was over. Officially. Completely. Finally. And I was still standing. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt myself slowly, not with grand gestures, but with small, steady steps. I rearranged the furniture. I repainted a wall. I bought plants I wasn't sure I'd keep alive. I learned how to cook meals I actually wanted to eat. I started going for long walks at sunset, letting the world remind me that endings were just a different kind of beginning. Every day I felt a little more like myself, or at least the version of myself that I had forgotten while trying to hold on to something that no longer existed. One evening, as I stood outside watching the sky fade into purple and gold, I felt a sense of peace settle into me. Real peace, not the forced calm I used to fake when she stopped calling. It was the peace of a man who survived the truth. A man who accepted what he couldn't change. A man who walked away not because he wanted to leave, but because he deserved to stay whole. She had found someone else. Someone in that new city. Someone who gave her excitement, attention, energy. The things she no longer found in our life. But what she found wasn't my loss. What I found afterwards was my gain. I found myself, my strength, my clarity, my future, and most importantly, I found the part of me that didn't need someone to stay in order to feel valued. I didn't hate her. I didn't wish her pain. I didn't wish her back. Some people come into your life to teach you love. Others come to teach you resilience. And some come to teach you when it's time to walk away. She taught me all three. Our story didn't end with a dramatic explosion. It ended the way distance always ends things. Quietly, steadily, inevitably. And the man who walked out of that ending was not the same man who feared it months before. He was stronger, calmer, wiser, more whole. I didn't lose a wife on that work trip. I found a life that finally belonged to me, and I never looked back.